There's a story of a woman, a queen of Thebes, who walked into a city holding what she thought was the head of a lion. It had tried to attack her, hidden in the bushes, but she and her maidens captured it and tore it apart. But then the madness faded. And as she looked down, she saw not the face of a lion, but a human face. A familiar face. Her son's. Her son had offended the god of wine, and he had taken his revenge. Welcome to the mysteries of mythology. Dionysus. You probably know Dionysus as the Greek god of wine, theatre, ecstasy, and madness. One version of Dionysus' story begins with a child god named Zagreus. Not all versions have Zagreus in the mythology, but I've included it because, well, it's my channel. Zagreus was the son of Zeus and Persephone, and to those who know their Greek mythology, Persephone was also Zeus's daughter, but not from his wife Hera, who was also Zeus's sister, but by his other sister, Demeter. More importantly, Zagreus was the child Zeus intended to inherit his throne. You probably think that Zeus was never planning on giving up his throne, but in this version he was saving up for his retirement. His wife Hera was furious. The king of the gods had plenty of bastard children, but this was the only one that Zeus wanted to become his successor. And in some versions, Zeus even placed the boy on his throne and let him play around with his thunderbolts. When Hera is angry, children end up dead, crippled, or thrown off mountains. So she asked the Titans for help, the ancient enemies that Zeus had defeated long ago. The Titans approached Zagreus carrying toys and gifts, including a mirror that the young god seemed to like. While Zagreus was distracted by the toys, they attacked and tore the child apart. In the nastier version, they cooked and consumed the pieces, the other white meat. So the heir of Zeus was gone, and Zeus was olympically pissed. He found the Titans and blasted them apart with divine lightning until nothing was left of them but ash. But Zeus discovered that one part of Zagreus survived, his heart. He sent Athena, who rescued it and brought it back to Zeus, and from that surviving heart, the life of the Olympic god would begin. Back when Zagreus was still alive, Zeus was having an affair with a mortal woman. No surprise there. He pretty much always was. But what's strange about this relationship was that this mortal actually consented to it. Her name was Semele. She was the daughter of Cadmus, the founder of Thebes, and she was deeply in love with Zeus and wished to have a child with him. Maybe because he shot thunderbolts from his divine rod, but instead of conceiving Dionysus in the usual way, Zeus gave Semele a potion made from the heart of Zagreus. Zeus loved Semele that much that he gave her the heart of his heir. But Semele was naive to think everything would be okay. Hera saw everything. Disguised as an elderly woman, Hera approached the young princess and began asking her questions. How could Semele be certain that the man visiting her was really Zeus? Had she any proof? Could she be sure she wasn't being deceived? Hera had planted the seed, and now Semele wasn't so sure who her lover really was. So when Zeus next visited, Semele asked him to make a promise. Zeus, confident he could give her anything she wished for, swore by the river Styx that he would grant whatever she wanted. Although the gods are pretty immoral, the one thing they did stick to was keeping oaths. Breaking a promise, especially one sworn on the river Styx, meant facing the wrath of higher, older cosmic forces. So Semele revealed what she wanted. She wanted to see Zeus as he truly was. Zeus immediately regretted making the promise. A mortal might survive a conversation with a god, but standing before a god in all their divine power was something else entirely. He begged her to change her mind, but he had to do what she asked. So he revealed his true form. Some say it was lightning, others describe divine fire. Whatever it was, Semele's body was overwhelmed. The divine fire consumed Semele before her child could be born. Zeus rescued the unborn child and sewed him into his thigh, carrying him there until the pregnancy was complete. Some think that when ancient writers said thigh, it was more what we consider loins, a poetic stand-in for genitals or testicles. And perhaps, like Athena was born from Zeus's head, which meant she was wise, being born from his loins could be why Dionysus was associated with sexuality and fertility. When the child was old enough, he was born a second time. That child was Dionysus, and Hera was still searching for him. Semele was dead, but Dionysus had survived. Zeus had pulled the unborn baby from the flames and carried him in his own thigh until he was ready to be born. But Hera was still out there. So Zeus handed the infant to Hermes and gave him a single job: keep this child alive. Hermes carried Dionysus away and placed him with his aunt Ino, Semele's sister. She was the daughter of Cadmus, which meant Dionysus was being hidden inside his mother's own royal house in Thebes. Ino and her husband Athamas took the child in, and for a while, things were okay. Some versions say they raised Dionysus as a girl, hoping Hera wouldn't recognize him. It wasn't really a bad idea. Hera was hunting for the son of Zeus and Semele, not a little girl hidden in a mortal household. Unfortunately, Hera was better at finding children than Zeus was at hiding them. When she discovered what had happened, she punished the family that had hidden and protected Dionysus. Hera sent madness into the home of Athamas and Ino. Athamas lost his mind and went into a blind rage. In one version, he took his own son and thought he was seeing a wild animal, so he hunted him down and killed him. Ino tried to escape her crazed husband with her other child, Melicertes. Terrified, she grabbed her son and leapt from a cliff into the sea. Her story doesn't end there for her, but that's another video. The family that had sheltered Dionysus was destroyed, but Dionysus escaped again. Even as a child, madness is already following Dionysus' story. Before he becomes a god who drives others mad, Hera's madness has already torn through the family that tried to protect him. Zeus now had to find somewhere safer, so Dionysus was taken to Nyssa. Where Nyssa was, ancient writers don't agree. Some placed it in Asia, some placed it in Arabia, others put it in Ethiopia, Libya, or even Thrace, or somewhere near Greece. It feels like Nyssa is a way of saying somewhere far away where Hera couldn't immediately ruin everything. Nyssa was imagined as a remote, wild place. There Dionysus was raised by nymphs. These nymphs hid him, protected him, and cared for him in the mountains. In some versions, Zeus rewarded them by placing them among the stars as the Hyades. Dionysus grew up hidden in the wild, surrounded by some interesting individuals. One of his famous companions was Silenus. Silenus is usually shown as heavy, bearded, fond of wine, balding, pot-bellied, and often associated with a donkey. He's often drunk, often ridiculous, and somehow still capable of saying something unexpectedly profound. Dionysus was also surrounded by the satyrs. Satyrs were wild, half-human followers with animal features, usually shown with tails, pointed ears, messy hair, permanent erections, and absolutely no interest in behaving themselves. In Greek art, they dance, drink, chase, shout, play music, and follow Dionysus wherever his worship goes. To me, this place sounds like Narnia, but the over-18s Greek version. Every moment was a party, a loud one. It's this loudness that gave him one of his later titles, Bromios, often understood as the Roaring One. Dionysus was never known to arrive quietly, which may not have been the best plan when you're hiding from your homicidal mother-in-law. The god was raised by nymphs, surrounded by satyrs, guided by Silenus, and shaped by the wild places beyond the city walls. And when he finally returned to the human world, he brought all of that with him. But he also brought something older, powerful, and pretty damn good after a hard day of work. By the time Dionysus emerged from Nyssa, he survived more than most gods experienced in an entire mythology, and now he began to travel. He's often described as a wandering god, moving around, stirring things up and moving on, but not every land welcomed him. In Thrace, King Lycurgus saw Dionysus and his followers as a threat. He attacked the god's companions and drove Dionysus himself into the sea, where Thetis sheltered him. So Dionysus filled Lycurgus with madness, and in that madness he turned on his own family. In some versions, Lycurgus is killed, blinded or dismembered, sometimes by his own people, and the land went barren until the king was removed. But when he returned to Greece, Dionysus also brought a gift with him: wine. In the ancient Mediterranean world, wine was everywhere. Feasts, ceremonies, political gatherings and funerals. The Greeks even had rules about how it should be consumed, mixing it with water. Drinking it undiluted was considered barbaric. The myths about wine sound like a night of drinking when you've had one too many. Communities would come together, celebrate a glass of wine, and hardship would get a little lighter for an evening. But the same drink that brought people together could also turn things messy. A group of Tyrrhenian pirates spotted a young man standing alone on the shore. He was handsome, calm, seemingly defenseless, so they grabbed him, threw him on the ship and planned to sell him as a slave. But not everyone on board was convinced. The helmsman looked at the stranger and realized something was wrong. He tried to warn the others that this was no ordinary young man and begged them to let him go. They ignored him, and that's when things started going wrong. Vines began growing across the deck, ivy wrapped around the mast, the smell of wine filled the air, and then the stranger turned into a lion. The crew threw themselves into the sea trying to escape, but Dionysus didn't let them drown. Instead, he turned them into dolphins. The only one spared from the transformation was the helmsman, who had recognized the god from the start. The pirates had chosen wrong, and a king named Pentheus was about to make the same mistake. Thebes should have welcomed Dionysus. It was his mother's city. His grandfather Cadmus had founded it, and his family still lived there. But by the time Dionysus returned, years had passed since Semele's death, and people had started telling their own version of events. Some said Semele had lied about Zeus. Others thought she had been punished for claiming a god had visited her. And if Semele had lied, then her son was not divine either. So Dionysus returned to a city that had already decided that he was, at best, a con artist. Pentheus was a young ruler who was proud, suspicious, and not especially open-minded, which is rarely a good combination in Greek mythology. When Pentheus heard that women were leaving the city and gathering in the mountains to worship this new god, he was furious. To him, this wasn't a religion, it was disorder to his rule. Women were leaving their homes, rituals were happening outside the city, and people were following a god he had not approved. Pentheus saw it as a challenge to his authority, and he had no intention of letting it continue. Then one day a stranger appeared in Thebes. He was young, calm, and strangely confident. He claimed to be a follower of Dionysus and spoke openly about the god's power. So Pentheus had him brought in for questioning. Pentheus had no idea, but the stranger was Dionysus. The conversation went about as well as you'd expect. Pentheus mocked the god. Dionysus warned him to be careful, but Pentheus ignored the warning and had the stranger arrested. But the prisoner escaped. Reports started coming in from the mountains that women devoted to Dionysus were doing strange things. They seemed stronger than they should be. They were moving through the wild as if the mountain had always been their home, and the messengers who came back were clearly shaken by what they'd seen. The more Pentheus heard about the rites, the more he wanted to see them. He claimed to hate the cult, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. Disguised as a stranger, Dionysus offered Pentheus a way to watch the women in secret. Since the women would never allow a man among them, Pentheus could go to the mountain disguised as a woman and observe from a distance. Pentheus, who was up for a little cross-dressing, agreed. Dionysus led him up the mountain where Pentheus hid among the trees, convinced he was watching without being seen. But the women spotted him almost immediately. Among them was Princess Agave, Pentheus' mother, but in the madness sent by Dionysus, she didn't recognize her son. She saw movement in the branches and thought she'd found a mountain lion. She and the other women rushed forward, and Pentheus tried to make them recognize him, but by then the madness had taken hold. The king of Thebes was torn apart by his own mother. When the madness faded, Agave returned to Thebes carrying what she believed was the head of a lion. Then she slowly realized what it really was: her son. The women who followed Dionysus are known as Maenads, usually translated as raving women. In myth, they carry ivy-wrapped staffs, move through mountains effortlessly, handle snakes, and sometimes perform impossible acts of strength. Greek artists love them, so you see them on pottery, in sculpture, and around Dionysus again and again. Women did play an important role in Dionysian worship. His festivals involved music, dancing, procession, and ceremonies that could take people outside the normal routines of city life. For Greek women, those daily lives were often tightly controlled. Dionysian worship offered a temporary break from the normal order. But Dionysus wasn't only a god of punishment. Ariadne was the daughter of King Minos of Crete. When Theseus entered the labyrinth to kill the Minotaur, Ariadne helped him survive. She gave him the thread that allowed him to find his way back out again, which is one of the most famous pieces of practical advice in Greek mythology. Because of Ariadne, Theseus escaped, and afterwards she left Crete with him. Ariadne betrayed her father, abandoned her home, and chose Theseus over everything she knew. And then Theseus left her behind, which was, in my professional mythological opinion, a dick move. Different versions tell this part differently. In some versions, Theseus abandons her deliberately. In others, the gods are involved, but the outcome is still the same. Ariadne is left on the island of Naxos, watching the ship sail away without her. And that's where Dionysus finds her. Dionysus sees the woman who was left behind, and in many versions he marries her. Some accounts go even further and say Ariadne was raised into divine company. A woman abandoned on an island becomes the wife of a god. Dionysus was also the god behind some of the greatest theatre in the ancient world. His worship was never quite private in a way that we might imagine some religious life today. It was public, physical, emotional, and often loud. In Athens, this connection became part of one of the biggest festivals in the Greek calendar. The City Dionysia, or Great Dionysia, was a major ancient Athenian festival held every spring in honor of the god Dionysus, and it became one of the most important dramatic events in the ancient Greek world. People gathered there to watch plays by writers like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, which means some of the most famous tragedies ever written were performed as part of a festival for this god. It was like the ancient Cannes Film Festival. So Dionysus was not just connected with drinking and celebration, he was connected with performance. Theatre suited Dionysus because it let people become someone else for a little while. An actor could put on a mask and become a king, a prophet, a murderer, or a god. For a few hours, people could sit together and escape reality. Then, when the play ended, the masks came off and everyone returned to their ordinary life. For some followers, Dionysus mattered because his story seemed to say something about death. In whichever version you read, Dionysus is reborn as far back as the heart of Zagreus. Certain religious traditions in the Greek world, especially those later connected with Orpheus, took that idea really seriously. These traditions are difficult to put neatly because we have fragments, references, later accounts, and a lot of scholarly arguing. But one idea keeps coming up. When Zeus destroyed the Titans with lightning, humanity was said to have emerged from their ashes. In this story, human beings inherited something from both sides. They carried the violence and disorder of the Titans, but also something of the divine child they had consumed. Part of humanity was low, violent, and trapped in the material world, but part of them reached towards something higher. For followers of these traditions, the divine part of the soul could be purified and eventually escape the cycle of suffering. Dionysus became important in that world because his mythology laid the path his followers hoped for. He had been broken apart and returned. This also gives some of his rituals a different meaning. The wine was not only a drink. In certain contexts, it could also become a way of drawing close to the god himself. Some ancient sources describe ecstatic gatherings, sacrificial meals, and rituals where the presence of Dionysus was felt through the body, through wine, and through their shared experience. That doesn't mean that every worshipper of Dionysus believed the same thing, or that every festival secretly performed the same ritual behind the scenes. His worship changed across time and place, and it would be a mistake to turn it into one tidy system. For some people, he gave shape to the hope that death was not just a shadowy continuation in the underworld, but something the soul might pass through, survive, and perhaps even overcome. Years after her death, Dionysus went down to the underworld to find his mother. That alone is unusual because Greek mythology doesn't usually allow a successful trip to the realm of the dead very often. But not only did Dionysus enter the underworld, he brought his mother back, and in some accounts, she was granted immortality and welcomed among the gods. Dionysus didn't stay in Greece. Like many Greek gods, he eventually found his way into Roman religion. In Rome, he was known as Bacchus. The wine, the processions, the music, the ecstatic celebration, all of it found a place in Roman life. And for a while, that didn't seem to have caused a problem. Then, in 186 BCE, the Roman Senate stepped in. The Romans were usually quite happy to absorb foreign gods and local cults, so their reaction to Bacchus suggested that something else about these rites had started to worry people in power. We know about this partly because of the bronze inscription called the Senatus Consultum de Baccanalibus, which is basically the Senate's decree on the Bacchus rites. It restricted gatherings, required official permission, and made it clear that Rome was no longer willing to let these ceremonies operate freely. The historian Livy gives a much more dramatic version of these events. According to him, the Bacchanalia had become centres of crime, conspiracy, and moral corruption, which is exactly the sort of thing that a Roman historian might say when trying to make a government crackdown sound necessary. Modern historians think there was some exaggeration to this. That doesn't mean nothing happened. The Senate's reaction was real, and clearly they believed the rites were a problem. But Livy was writing later, and ancient writers liked turning religious panic into a good story. The most likely issue was not that every Bacchic gathering had become some enormous criminal underworld. It was probably the fact that these rites brought people together in ways Rome found difficult to manage. Men and women could be involved in the same religious world. People from different social levels could share the same rituals. Some meetings happened away from the normal public structures of Roman life. For Roman authorities, that was enough to make Bacchus look dangerous. In Thebes, that fear belonged to Penthus. In Rome, it belonged to the Senate. But the crackdown didn't erase him. The restrictions remained, but Bacchic worship continued in different forms. Bacchus outlasted the decree, just as Dionysus had already outlasted kings, enemies, and even death in his own mythology. By this point, survival was not just part of his story, it had become one of the things Dionysus did best. There is one contradiction with Dionysus that I think is worth mentioning. In so many of his myths, he's treated like an outsider. He wanders in from somewhere else, he arrives in a city that doesn't trust him, even Thebes, his own mother's city, is greeted with suspicion rather than recognition. And ancient writers would lean into that idea. Some place parts of his story in distant lands, others describing him travelling across the world before bringing back his worship to Greece. For a long time, some modern scholars thought that Dionysus might have been a foreign god who entered Greek religion later. And that's true of a lot of ancient deities, but archaeology seems to contradict this. In the 20th century, scholars deciphered Linear B, a writing system used by the Mycenaean Greeks centuries before the classical period. Most of the surviving tablets are things like livestock records, land inventories, and admin lists, which are useful if you're studying ancient bureaucracy, but less useful if you're trying to stay awake. But among those records, the name Dionysus appears. So his worship was not a late arrival to Greek religion. His name reaches back into some of the earliest Greek writing we can read. Dionysus is often introduced as a god of wine, and that's true. He is the twice-born god, the wanderer with wine, and a long way from the cheerful figure with a drinking cup that people often imagine. Dionysus had a hard life, and he could make people do horrifying things. But unlike some other Olympians, he's usually dangerous to people who deny him, attack his followers, or mock his mother. Dionysus, at least I think, was a fairer god than the rest of his family, kind to those who were nice, and unleashing a maddening fury on those who disrespected him or those whom he loved. What do you think? Let me know in the comments.